Talk me through what a standard Christmas Eve looks like for you.
My normal Christmas is a little bit weird because my older brother's birthday is on Christmas Eve. So we tend to, it's kind of like a weird blend of a birthday celebration and a Christmas Eve. So we kind of go out for dinner. And then I usually go to the pub. And usually a tradition with me and my mates is we go to midnight mass. Usually when my friends are absolutely plastered. And it's the worst and best thing ever. What's that? Is that the...
What's a Christingle?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
It's the orange.
I'm not a Christian.
Which signifies
Oh, yeah, okay. I thought it was
world,
that from your hand.
The candle.
Yeah.
And then the sweets in it.
You're practicing Christian or something? Or is this,
I've held a few Christingles in my time.
Yeah, I have as well. Back when I was, 5? So about, a long time ago. But no, usually it results in me having secondhand embarrassment watching my mates do stupid shit inside the church. Nothing offensive or anything. Just being general idiots because they're drunk. While a bunch of old people sit in the pews and sort of sit there. And also my music teacher back in school, he also does the he does the piano for the choir on midnight mass. So he is he knows what we're up to.
Weird afters. That's a weird after party.
It is a little. I don't do it anymore. It is usually just for shits and giggles, but I can't do it anymore because it's the second embarrassment. Obviously, I stopped drinking, so I'm actually not oblivious to what's going on, and social cues are actually relevant. So it is rough, fun but rough. But yeah, it's a good time though. It's nothing bad. I'm acting like we're vandalizing the church or something. I wouldn't die. We're just there for a laugh, really.
You're the scoundrels sabotaging the church roof.
We are.
You're the one that they're raising money for. All these scrubs from the local pub coming down and abusing the pianist. I
would never.
I actually, so my friend's birthday's on Christmas Eve as well. So I actually used to take a harsh stance of that being one of the worst birthdays to have. As I get a little bit older, I realise it's actually one of the better ones because no one really has any excuse to miss it. So we usually do...
That's true, actually,
Yeah, we usually have a little drink or whatnot around his house, and then we go to the pub. Usually it's a little bit of a lively one. It's the local. But I'll be honest, I'm not in the mood. Every year I get less in the mood to say hello to the exterior group of people I know are going to be there. I went to a restaurant the other day in my local area just with a couple of friends, just to meet up with a few boys from uni before we went out for obviously before we had Christmas. We don't always get to see each other. So we met up, we had a meal, and we're standing in the restaurant, and I turned to my friend and I just said, everyone has this place. This is the worst establishment for me to possibly be in, to bump into a random assortment of old connections, whether that be old school teachers, friends of a friends that I've known, people maybe that I even used to go out with, all variety of terrible people that you wouldn't want to bump into on an evening out. So I've got that done and dusted. It's a random restaurant. I've bumped into Ronnie O'Sullivan in a dressing gown there. You get a wide collection. Yeah, you get a wide collection of you just
drop in that as if it's some sort of
well, he's he is local. He is local, and he's a bit of a wild card anyway. So I've seen him pull up in his Audi R8 in his dressing gown.
For those who don't know, Ronnie O'Sullivan, the uneducated Ronnie O'Sullivan, probably the greatest snooker player of all time. I feel like most people even know his name. My dad would crucify you for saying that. I'm not into snooker either, really, but I feel like it's not really our sort of generation, is it? I feel like generally speaking, it's a bit of an older thing.
Sport. Like, let's be real. Let's call a spade a spade. It's a terribly miserable sport. Just to do everything. I understand the pool bit a little bit, but snooker I've never got on board with, and I'm a fan of most sports.
That's fair.
Talking about sports, let's roll into last night. Let's get stuck into the boxing, because we didn't obviously have any MMA, but we did have a big boxing event, right? Because the complaint typically around boxing is we don't get big names, we don't get big cards, we don't get big narratives. And that sort of got put to bed a little bit last night, because obviously we had a bit of a star-studded lineup on the Day of Reckoning, they were calling it, in Saudi Arabia. So we obviously had Deontay Wilder. We had AJ on the same card. We had Daniel Dubois. Bivol was on the card. So there were some big names, some really big names in boxing. And I'm just a casual, and I'm pretty tapped into those. So that's when you know it's a decently lined up event. What did you think of what you saw of it in terms of the events and maybe the fights themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I saw, I think it might have been Ariel Hawani on Twitter say something about it being the first time the boxing has had a card that's close to the sort of stacked sort of comparison to the UFC in terms of how stacked a card is, which I sort of agree with, because I usually in a boxing card it's one or two big names and then just sort of an array of auxiliary fighters. Cannon fodder that don't get paid enough. Exactly. And to be honest, that was, when you say the word cannon fodder, I was kind of guilty of that yesterday as well. Loads of massive favourites coming in, overwhelming favourites, big underdogs, which just feels like every boxing event. But I will have to give credit to, I don't know, is Riyadh Season like a company or is it just an event?
Turki Al Sheikh.
I don't even know.
His Excellency.
It's that Saudi money, man.
His
Excellency. His Excellency, I have to say before I get assassinated. But you never know. But no, they held a good event. And I think I actually have to give them credit because they're very good at putting on those sort of cards. I feel like the big spectacle. I think it's something maybe boxing's had in the past but missed in terms of that consistency of these big events. And this doesn't seem like a one-off either. And I will say the marketing was good as well. I don't know if I was getting bombarded with those adverts. I don't know if you were the same, of the sort of big promotional material with AJ and Wilder. They were like, did you not see it? It was really cool. They were basically like massive, covered in makeup, looking like zombies in this big post-apocalyptic thing, and they had their gloves on and stuff. It was really cool. And I hadn't seen that in a while, so I have to give them credit for what was actually quite a well-run event. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I didn't watch the whole card because obviously I'm not, we're both not obsessed with boxing as we are with MMA, but yeah, it was a fun time. I thought Parker looked really good against Wilder, who just looked, I don't want to call him a shell of his former self. It just felt like he was fighting how he normally fights, just without landing the right hand that he always does. So that's what everyone was waiting for. He doesn't fight to win rounds, does he?
I think it was less than that,
knock someone out. Yeah. I mean, he didn't look good. I'll say that. I don't think he looked good at all. He was barely even in that fight. Because he was seriously hurt at one point. I think maybe it was the 7th round or something like that. Again, forgive me if I'm wrong there, but I will say on the opposite end of the spectrum, I thought AJ looked probably the best he's ever been in probably a long time, probably since that. I think he looked disciplined in the second Ruiz fight. He looked good in that fight, but nothing groundbreaking. But I think it's the first time we saw AJ in a new camp where he looked predatory and offensive. I think he's always fought technically probably and been a bit gun shy since the sort of 2 Ruiz fights. So it was good to see him back in that sort of old era AJ. And it was sort of represented by those white shorts he was wearing. It just, like, the clear white shorts just brought me back to, I believe he was wearing them in the Klitschko fight. I hope I'm correct there. But that was an example of AJ where it was him at his best, predatory, offensive, looking for a knockout. And he did that against Wallin and he got it. Maybe it was between rounds, but he was piecing him up. Looked very good.
You talk about predatory. There's only one Le Predator, and that is the only fight to make. That's the only fight to make before this fight was even made.
Very good.
And
very
now,
good. It took me a minute there.
Even more so. Francis Ngannou, Anthony Joshua is the only fight to make in the aftermath of this event. And as it got teed up for this incredible day of reckoning with this star-studded lineup, there always was going to be a spanner in the works when you have a fight down the line. So Francis Ngannou sitting on the sideline, seeing what's unraveling for him next. They obviously put that AJ and Wilder fight in ink for March the 8th, I believe, if they both won. Obviously, the spanner in the works was the fact that Wilder came out and looked terrible. Quite honestly terrible. And now I'm looking at all of those fights, most definitely including AJ, saying Francis Ngannou can very well beat any of those top guys. Absolutely any of them. Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Wilder, chuck in who you like. He can beat any of them. And I think
Isn't it
they're
crazy
the exciting
that we're saying
fights
that now?
But they're the only fights that are exciting. Who the hell cares about Joshua Wilder anymore? I do not.
It will still sell, but it doesn't have the value.
Do you
that it does
care
now.
about
Absolutely.
that? Do you care about
Not
that?
really. No. I mean, I'll still watch it. I won't pay for it, though. I'll put it that way.
Wilder seems to look like that guy now.
Russian link.
He seems to look like that guy now. If we were going to compare it to MMA terms, maybe Tyron Woodley, where had a good reign.
Good comparison.
crazy knockout power, had a certain style, but for whatever reason towards the end of his career lost that sort of tenacity in his approach, and now we just watch all of their fights waiting for that one knockout blow, which more times than not it doesn't always come. It's very hard to do, and especially the later the fight gets, the less you get in the fight, the harder that's going to be able to land. And we sort of saw that in Wilder, and I'm not saying that can't be a one-off, but he did speak about his ayahuasca trip and how he said he just doesn't, he didn't say he doesn't anything. He just said he found peace within himself. So there is a big question there. Does he have that? I know it's cliche, but it's true. Does he have that hunger?
You said it
Does he
last
have
week.
that aggressiveness?
Father time. Father time is undefeated. It's the same thing, man.
I think it's a combination of things.
It's
for
catching up to him.
Those two, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's 38 now, I believe. So I believe he's 38.
Let's be honest,
getting
right?
on the back end.
If I come up to you and it doesn't matter about money when we come to those guys, because they've got such big bank balances. Of course, a big payday is always nice, but my point is it doesn't incentivize them like they once would. And you come up to Wilder and you say, oh, you've just come off the spin of a couple of crazy fights, or a few crazy fights with Tyson Fury, biggest name in the sport, one of the biggest sportsmen in the world, crazy numbers, wild fights, massive narratives, and then you go and chuck him in there with a Parker, and it's like, as good as Parker is, the name value isn't there, the check's big, but does that incentivize you in the camps? Not really. So sort of at this point now for Wilder, like I said, I'm not as tapped into the market, but I think you have to just make the exciting fights now, and I believe they've got the money in place to do so. And for me, that's Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou. That's the only fight to make. Only fight to make.
It is a crazy conversation, isn't it? It's crazy that we're even having that. I mean, you would have said that a couple of months ago. We would have been like saying it would have been a novelty fight, but now we're talking seriously as Ngannou potentially becoming a heavyweight champion of the world. Some people would say he already is. You know, I think he's ranked number 13 or something like that. It's wild. It is crazy to say that this is the timeline we're in. And when you have power like that, I was debating with my brother about who hits harder between Ngannou and Wilder. And I said Ngannou, and obviously it's a bit biased.
Probably
there,
Wilder, maybe.
It doesn't matter when you got two punchers like that. I think in boxing context, maybe, I don't know. But that's a debate for another day. The point is, when you have just game-changing power like that, you don't need to have the technical ability. And I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but anytime something like that happens and it comes into fruition where you've got a guy like Ngannou just knocking out someone, who's far better ability-wise, it still shocks people. Because at the end of the day, not many people can do what he can.
Tyson Fury.
Yeah, in many rounds he did, which makes it even more scary. The fact that he's able to do that in a debut as well. It's crazy.
And in truth, I look at that Ngannou-Wilder matchup now, and when you look at Wilder when he's in the ring, he's 215 pounds. Ngannou is the better side of 260. So you just think about those two in the clinch. Ngannou's going to be heavy. And that's where he dominated a lot of the rounds against Tyson Fury, was in that clinch. He did switch stances. He did use certain techniques that cross over from MMA and wrestling. Time where he spends a lot where boxers don't traditionally. He said he was cutting angles that wrestlers would typically cut on boxers, and they had no idea what was happening because, of course, he's moving in an unconventional way. So if we start putting 260-pound frame in that sort of matchup, I don't even know if that fight's massively competitive from what I saw on the weekend. Of
Against
course,
Wilder.
he could come out. Yeah, I don't think that's even that competitive. I think Francis Ngannou is... I think, of course, the narrative going into that is power and he's landing the shot. But let's be realistic about it. Wilder gave his best shots to Tyson Fury and he got up. And we haven't seen anything from Ngannou to suggest that he doesn't have the chin to take any nuclear power. It's not that Wilder's knocked everyone out. Tyson Fury got back up. And if Tyson Fury did, I'll bet you any money that Francis Ngannou probably wouldn't even go down.
Yeah, when's the last time you've seen Ngannou in any sort of spot of trouble in terms of with his chin? Yeah, you haven't. I can't think of a time you have.
Even when Tyson Fury's rolling elbows off his forehead.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think I'm with you there. I really think he can beat Wilder pretty convincingly. I think AJ is much harder for him. I think AJ moves a lot faster at heavyweight, and I think just weirdly, style. I think it's just a stylistic thing. I think AJ would likely have a much more comfortable time with Ngannou. Not saying he'd have an easy one, because I don't think you can have an easy time with Ngannou over 12 rounds, because you've got to be on your A game for the whole time. But yeah, I mean, if he let's say they do the Wilder fight, with Ngannou, he's immediately in the conversation for fighting for the belt, like straight away. Realistically, it doesn't matter who he fights. He's 1 or 2 fights away against anybody in that sort of top 10 area in heavyweight, really, because he's going to have that hype behind him. And it's the same in MMA. It's the money game, realistically. That's what combat sports is. And Ngannou's going to sell out hotcakes regardless of who he fights. So I think they'll push him towards a belt pretty soon if he really wants to pursue it.
Talking about stardom and selling like hotcakes, there's a man that sells more hotcakes than anyone in the mixed martial arts world. He goes by the name of Conor McGregor, and he is being stifled by the UFC. What do you think about this?
So he says. I don't know if I can take a word.
I believe in 100. Really? Are you being serious? I think it's so obvious that's exactly what's happening, and I think that there's precedence for that happening before. Why do you think that Dustin Poirier fight finally got made? That's when they both threatened to have a charity boxing match because the UFC weren't giving him any fights. You go and watch his documentary behind the scenes. They slowball him. Guess what they don't let him do? Fight in COVID. Why? Because you can't sell out arenas when you're in COVID. So Conor McGregor didn't fight throughout COVID. They slowballed him there. Then they slowballed him with a Poirier fight.
Sorry, just to jump in, wasn't the Dustin Poirier second fight in COVID? That was Fight Island.
Well, so this is what I'm saying, but this is why they didn't give him a fight for so long, is because they didn't want to make any fights with Conor McGregor just fighting in the apex, if that makes sense. And then why did that fight get happened? That's my point. Why did that get made? Why did that fight in the apex get made? That was never going to happen. It only happened because Dustin and Conor were on Twitter, if you remember, saying, cool, let's do a charity boxing match. And they were setting that up. And then the UFC was like, right, okay, we've got no option. We have to make this fight. But before that, they weren't. And now they aren't. They said he didn't, and don't get me wrong, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt of what you see in the cameras. But when you cross-reference this with his documentary and what we've seen before factually be true, it's the exact same scenario. And when we have a look at it from the business perspective for the UFC, think about it like this.
That's what I was going to ask. Why would you not do it?
Well, think about it. From a business perspective, right? If you have your ultimate pawn, you have your ultimate Conor McGregor, that he moves every piece and he's the biggest name for every event. So what starts happening is you start trying to over-optimize. You start trying to find the perfect card. You start trying to find the perfect location, the perfect opponent, the perfect time of year, the perfect backing. Is it in the Saudis? Is it UFC 300? Is it a case of UFC 300 will be big regardless of who's on it? So can we bolster another card and chuck Conor McGregor on another card? Are we waiting for someone to come back from outside of the UFC and Nate Diaz potentially? Are we waiting to not have an announcement because we need to wait until USADA's gone? There's so many moving parts, and let's forget everything we know of Conor McGregor and remember the one thing at his core. He's a competitor. I don't care about if he's hungry, if he's good enough to get to the side. It's all irrelevant. He's a competitor, and there's no buzz in the world that is possible to achieve other than stepping out in front of the world in an octagon and performing. There's no buzz. There just isn't a comparable buzz. So for all the business, all the stout, all the forged in, all of that, it doesn't matter when he's not competing, and he is a competitor. And if he says that he wants a fight and he's coming out on camera saying, I wanted to fight in December, I want to fight in April, he's not behind the scenes going, oh, I'm not signing a contract. When has McGregor not ever signed a contract? You can say what you like about the man, but he fights and he doesn't pull out of fights. There are two things that you can say for him. He always wants to fight and he never pulls out of them. Like, that is a fact that, as history has shown us. So that's my rant over.
No, I can see where you're coming from, because, I mean, like Dana White and sort of the UFC brass as a whole, it's just notoriously political. There's a lot of discourse about matchups and stuff. It's a lot of stuff that we as fans don't know, and a lot of stuff that fighters even don't know. So I wouldn't be surprised, as you said, if he's maybe kept in the dark or being postponed a little bit. I was more on the mindset of maybe they push him to do an event past UFC 300 because, as you said, UFC 300 is going to sell like crazy anyway. So why put McGregor on that card unless you're trying to break the sort of all-time record? From a business perspective, it makes more sense to spread him out. So you're getting 2 events, which realistically, any McGregor event is going to sell over 1 million pay-per-views. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. I just don't know if we have the ability to trust McGregor anymore in 2023 because he's so erratic.
It adds up
so
too much, though.
all over the place. Do you know what I mean?
I
get what you're saying.
Mean.
I
get
don't
what
know
you
if I
mean.
could give 100% faith in him at all.
If he wasn't,
he's just a loose cannon.
If he wasn't in the training room, if he wasn't sparring, if I hadn't have seen a lot of footage recently of him putting rounds in, him looking in good shape, him talking about certain dates, you can say what you like, but as soon as the biggest name in the sport comes out and says, I want to fight on this day, there's not much lies around that. It can get fact checked very quickly, very, very quickly. And if he's coming out saying, I wanted to fight in December, and now they're saying I can't fight in April, I have a strong tendency to listen to what he says over the UFC, who, like you say, are going to make it as political as they can. And not that they're just trying to make it difficult on purpose, but like I said, they're just trying to over-optimize their biggest star, right? So it does make sense. I don't think that Michael Chandler fight's going to happen.
Really?
Don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, it feels like the longer we go without it, I'm inclined to agree. And I feel for Michael because he's done. Realistically, it was his work that got him this far. He really did the heavy lifting because McGregor sells himself. I think without Michael Chandler, you don't get that fight because he's been putting in the work to get that fight. That call out, when he knocked out Ferguson was iconic. So I do feel for him because that's a money fight. Everyone wants the money fight. You're laughing to the bank if you fight McGregor. It's the red panty night, as he says. There's no shame in admitting that. So I do feel for him, and maybe that fight doesn't happen. And I know there was murmurs on Twitter, I'm sure you saw, of him looking at Nate Diaz. Dustin Poirier was doing the same as well. So maybe that's the avenue that gets taken.
Would. Nate Diaz is at the moment.
Why not?
Nate Diaz is at the moment that number that someone would have in their phone that they maybe drop a message to when it's 3 o'clock and they've had too many drinks. It's like the ones you wouldn't do in the sober light of day, but when push comes to shove, it's like, yeah, I'll take one for the team. I'll fight Nate Diaz. I would want to fight Nate Diaz. If it's on big pay-per-views and I'm getting a lot of money for it, it's just not. Yeah. He's just as much of a legend as he is, and for everything he's done in the sport. If you're Michael Chandler or Dustin Poirier, what you're telling me, there's not another fight more stylistically beautiful for your career and getting a win than Nate Diaz. Yeah. It's just perfectly lined up. And I think
there's something about, I think it works as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of just cut in there, but I think there's something about that being on UFC 300 where an event like that, it's almost a sort of romanticism to it. There's sort of that nostalgic feel you get. You want those sort of aging vet versus the sort of, not up and comer, but sort of current star. There's some sort of appeal to that, which you're only going to get on an event like 300. I think back to obviously Brock Lesnar on UFC 200, which was before we were really properly into the sport, but it's the same premise. You want those sort of half novelty fights, if that's what I guess is the best thing to call them. So it's a fun matchup. I think either of those guys you pit against Diaz, why not? Sometimes you just want to cut loose and break the boundaries of whatever makes sense conventionally in the sport and just say fuck it. I think it's fun.
Well, talking about non-conventional and fun, Paulo Costa.
Another segue,
mate.
Paulo Costa. Have I missed something?
Too easy.
You're on fire.
I hear Bisping and Anthony Smith, right? They do. I love them. He's them.
Not. Yeah.
They do basic segues and bang on about it for hours. I think that's nothing. That's nothing.
No, you're
Come
very
to the
good.
MMA Creators podcast, right? And I'll show you how to slide into the next conversation. That's it. You can write these ones down. But all jokes aside, Paulo Costa versus Bobby Knuckles.
I got one. You just say, speaking of writing things down, something you might need to use, an eraser.
That's terrible. That's so bad. I knew where you were going with it, and I thought, please don't stumble as hard as I feel like you're going to stumble. And I was like,
I couldn't execute. Listen, I Hail Married it. I couldn't execute.
That's not a Hail Mary. That's watching from the sides at just the fat kid trying to run 10 meters.
It
You're
came
gonna
to me
make that.
last second, so I shot the 3-pointer. It was terrible.
I'm glad this got.
Carry on.
I'm glad that
Paulo
this got
Costa.
made up. To be perfectly honest, I'm glad that this got remade because that top of the middleweight division's a little bit murky, and there's not a ton going on. To be honest, it's
a weird
more
one, isn't
exciting
it?
than it's been.
Yeah.
But there's still just a few sort of stale pieces there. Paulo Costa's one of them, and Bobby Knuckles also is at the moment as well. Just with his obviously recent loss to DDP, sort of questions over him. What's he going to kick on and do in the division? Because I would be a fool to say that he's not a bad fighter overnight, and we can't write him off.
Agreed.
Don't forget that he's just sort of in the prime of his life. He's just about hit 30. So we look at
Is
champs.
he really?
Yeah, we look at champs, and the average age is around about 32 for middleweight champions. So yeah, just coming into his prime. So there's a lot left for him to do.
He's 33, yeah.
I'm glad. Well, he's a little bit older than what I said, but that's what I'm saying. Still, sort of in those prime years of his,
especially in middleweight. That's exactly where you want to be
of his life for sure. But I don't know about Paulo Costa. He needs a big win here. He really does need a big win because I don't know if
just needs some momentum.
I don't know if the shtick sort of continues with another loss.
I think it's just the lack of activity is hurting him. You can be Mr. Twitter fingers all you want and talk a big game, but if you're not stepping in the cage, eventually that hype is just going to dwindle and dwindle away. And we are seeing that with Paulo. So the main thing is just to see him back in the cage. I think that's the first step towards an upwards trajectory, win or lose, is just put on a good performance, competitive at least. And it's going to be difficult to do against a guy like Whittaker because realistically, I stand by ability-wise, he's probably the most well-rounded in that division. If you look at sort of skill for skill, he may not be the champ anymore, but he's got a resume that would rival some of the the greatest fighters ever. So yeah, he's got his work cut out for him. But it's a fun matchup at the end of the day, and we're fans at the end of the day, so I'm looking forward to it. And
you said there middleweight resumes that would match anyone. A man that can certainly do that, Israel Adesanya, has spoke about coming back a lot sooner than he initially said. And I've been saying this forever. On my posts all the time, people say, he's coming back in 2027. Understand sports a little better because these people are competitive and there's only so long that you can be outside of the sport, or in their particular case the cage, for someone like Israel who's so competitive and always likes a challenge. And the murmurs are Khamzat Bors Chimaev. What do you think about that for UFC 300?
That is, I'll not be complaining. Why not? You've got two of the sport's biggest stars going against each other. It's a no-brainer in terms of what do I want to see? I'll see that. That's something I'd pay for. But as a matchup stylistically, it's a difficult one for Izzy. But at the same time, I don't know because
you think,
it's such a hard one because it's a matter of whether Chimaev turns up or not, and if he can improve on that cardio. Because I don't think Izzy's fought a guy that can press, that sort of push a pace and sort of forward pressure that Chimaev does. But at the same time, Chimaev's cardio is, Gastelum's one, I suppose. So maybe I'll hold that.
That's a pace, not a wrestling pace.
Do you know what I'm saying, though?
In truth.
Yeah, wrestling pace. That's more where I was visioning. And on the other end, you can talk about Chimaev's gas tank not being where it needs to be compared to most guys in that division. Because let's be honest, that Usman fight showed us that it's pretty poor, and he had a full camp for that. So I don't know. It's such a hard one to call because Izzy's grappling, I actually would go as far to say it's underrated. I think it's a lot better than people give credit for, at least defensively. But
well, it has to be,
I don't know. Usman was able to tag him. It's just it's a matter of how far that fight goes, really. For me, it's the same thing I said about if Chimaev fights Strickland. The longer that fight goes, the more it is in Chimaev's opponent's favor, whoever that is.
In truth,
for me, Chimaev has to get it done early.
In truth, I think Izzy is probably the worst matchup for Khamzat Chimaev. One of, if not the worst matchup. I think that's evidenced. I think Israel's entire career has been the same narrative. Wrestler versus striker.
That's true.
So he's prepared his entire career up until this point to essentially stop takedowns, get up off of his back and strike. He's done that his entire career. The only times that he's fell victim to that very temporarily was at light heavyweight against people like Jan Blachowicz, who probably had 20, 30 pounds on him. And he wasn't really doing anything offensively damaging. He wasn't really chasing submissions, wasn't really landing ground and pound. Just sort of had a 20-pound grappling advantage on him. And that sort of just swayed the rounds, really. You look at someone like Khamzat Chimaev. It's very difficult to take someone down when they're moving, when they're switching stances, when they're showing you knees and kicks, when they're showing you every variety of kick, and then when they're tagging you at the same time. And we can obviously have the conversation of his recent performance, but if we just take Israel on face value of what we've seen for the last half decade,
it speaks for itself, you know.
I think it's going to be a struggle for Khamzat. What, he doesn't take him down in the first or the second? What happens to him then? What, he gets stood at range? What, you think that's going to be a good fight for Khamzat Chimaev at range with Israel? Can't see it.
And we talk about very sloppily on those sort of last ends of combinations. You know what I mean? Usman was tagging him in that third round. And that's Usman. Let's be honest, it's a guy who's not, you know, he's a sort of
he's not a great striker.
Yeah, he's power puncher, really. Let's call it what it is. He's not a bad striker, but technically there are many ahead of him. But Usman was making it look pretty easy on the feet, I have to say, in that third round. And really, realistically, what that comes down to is the cardio of Chimaev. When he starts to slow, and it happens in every fight, if he doesn't get the finish early on, you know, you're going on the extreme end of the spectrum. When he finished Kevin Holland straight away, those questions don't need to be asked. Same against when he fought Gerald Meerschaert. Those questions don't need to be asked. But when he gets dragged to those deep waters, as he did against Gilbert Burns, there was a lot of questions. I thought, it was just his fight IQ. You know, maybe a lack of awareness, you know, willing to go into the fire rather than looking for the finish. But the reality was now, I don't think he has the ability to execute his plan past the first round or the second round tops, you know. I think he starts to fade and he can't implement that wrestling. It's not because he feels like he can strike with these guys. He just doesn't have the energy to get the guy to the ground. And I think you're right, against a guy like Adesanya, he's going to struggle because Izzy's going to be asking those questions all the time. You know, there's a variety of strikes he's going to offer. He's going to keep Chimaev guessing and on his toes. It's the more I think about it, I think you're right.
The more
it's a fun one.
You have to think as well, Khamzat Chimaev has never really faced anyone. People forget how big Israel is and how difficult that body style is at middleweight because he is very long, super long. And one thing that we know about Izzy as well, has some of the best conditioning in the UFC. This is a guy that's nasal breathing in the 5th round with a very low heart rate in championship fights. He's been there, he's done that, and he's pushed incredible paces before. So if it's one or two, I can't see him taking him down. I really can't see Chimaev taking him down. I just can't. I
do think he will. I just don't think he'll get anywhere with it.
I think the sizes will be a big difference, right? So I've never stood next to Izzy, but 6'4", very long limbs. He's a lot denser than I think people actually realise. He's very naturally. He's a lot closer. Put it this way, he's a lot closer to light heavyweight than he is a middleweight. And I actually believe Chimaev is closer to 170 than he is 185, because you see pictures and you see angles of him. It does look crazy, but he's not massive. He really isn't. And middleweights are big guys
relative to
at
natural
times.
Middleweights, yeah.
So I think he's going to struggle.
Usman wasn't a natural middleweight, and he struggled.
No.
He struggled against Usman. He wasn't a natural middleweight.
No time to prepare for that fight at middleweight whatsoever. And we spoke about when Izzy fought guys that could press a wrestling pace like that. That's actually wrong, because I come back and I think, well, Bobby Knuckles can definitely do that.
Yoel Romero can.
Well,
not that he did, but he can.
Exactly. So this is my point, right? We've always seen this narrative, and it's very easy to say, okay, cool, take him down, do damage or whatnot. We've never seen him submitted. We've never really seen him controlled. And I just can't. It's like I said, it's very easy to say take someone down, but when they're switching both stances, they're moving laterally and they're not in one place at any given time, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So
I think a good comparison to make there is just the fight we saw just the other week. I mean, the big question at 296 was whether Colby could get Leon to the mat.
Well, there you go.
And there you go. Yeah, and we both said that the size difference was a huge factor. And it clearly was, because Leon, who's a guy who wasn't a natural wrestler, only really started training and wrestling within the last 10, 15 years. compared to a guy like Colby, who's basically shooting a double leg out the womb, and Liam was able to take him down pretty, I don't want to say with ease, but, I will say it actually, with ease. He got him down twice, I believe. And, that was just to prove a point. And that shows you how big of a size difference is. And you can talk about maybe Colby being over the hill, but that ability doesn't really leave you at the age he's at, being
no one
such
cares
a
to watch him fight
soul
anymore.
wrestler.
I'm just putting that out there.
Colby?
No one cares.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
No one cares.
We can delve into that. That was probably the biggest assassination of character, self-inflicted, I will say, we've ever seen in the cage. It was literally like watching his world crumble in
really
about
was.
5 minutes flat. It was crazy. That was surreal to watch. Just being able to even acknowledge that subconsciously of what you're seeing is literally the fall of a man. That shows you how bad it is. Yeah, that was crazy.
Because the thing is now, right, you put your... I won't go into this too much, because obviously it was a bit played out, but if you're the UFC now, you have someone who's on the contract of one of the bigger names, one of the biggest guys, obviously no pay-per-view points for any of the craziness that the sport endured over the last few years, because he was always the B-side. He never got pay-per-view points for any of the atrocities he committed verbally on the mic.
You know what? That's not even like a hyperbolic to say that anymore. I fully agree with you.
No, absolutely
that
not.
Performance was an atrocity. I know
but
you're
now
really
you're in a
referencing
position
stuff on the
where
mic, but
the UFC aren't behind him, the fans aren't behind him, and he doesn't have a style, or at least he doesn't have a fight of recent that we can look back to and go, oh, I'd really like to see him against X, Y, and Z. Absolutely not. Well, you're telling me that fans are going to want to see Colby and Wonderboy Thompson? No, they're more likely to want to see MVP versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson after the Kevin Holland fight, or if that weren't to happen, for example. But my point is now, do we see him again? Does he want to climb back up the rankings? Does he want to fight contender fights? Is he capable of doing that? How many more fights can he do? He's 35 years of age. Coming into it, we spoke about how he's been in the game, just the game, for a very long time. So there's every scenario where the UFC, I don't believe they're going to cut him, but are they going to want to pay 250 grand to watch him fight some random guy without much appeal? Probably not.
I still think he has the name value. I don't think I'm not going to go that far into the sort of extreme side that no one's going to want to watch him fight.
But why does he?
Still at the point where people want to see the downfall in a weird way. It's just a small part of this sort of the way it's gone has actually gone in his favor, because people are still going to want to tune in to just see him crumble even further. It's almost like a pity watch.
True.
So I in a way, I almost feel like that holds some value. Yeah, exactly. And that is as well. That's the other part. You can build someone else up while bringing him down, if you know what I mean. So, bit of a double-edged sword for the UFC, but yeah, for Colby, for me, the only way is down. And I'm not one to be too pessimistic about fighters' careers, but we know how this game is. It chews you up and spits you out, in an instant. So I think it's Colby's time. Same way it was Tyron Woodley's time, and soon to be, for me, Usman's time as well. That's just how it is.
Talking of times, there's someone in the light heavyweight division who's finally looking to have his, and he goes by the name of Alexander Rakic, finally healthy, finally got a big name matchup with Yuri Prochazka, and they've chucked that on UFC 300.
Yes. Why not? It's a good start. I know I saw people complaining about it on Twitter, which I was like, why the fuck are you complaining about that? That's a great matchup. It's Twitter. That's your answer. That doesn't need an explanation. People like to complain. True. But I love it. I think it's a fun one. It's a good, I think it's about as good of a matchup you're going to get for a guy like Rakic in terms of to bolster his chances of being in that title picture, because a win over Jiri throws you right there. I think that's the only thing he needs. I think being a former champion and a recent one at that's all the name value and stock you're going to need to be fighting for a belt in your following fight. So I think he'll be licking his lips saying, I could take that. And we know Jiri, as unorthodox as he is, kind of lends itself to a poor defensive sort of stance. He's open to a lot of shots. And we saw that against Alex Pereira. So, yeah, I think he's got a very good chance. And it's so hard to predict the Prochazka fight just because of the way he fights. Because one moment he's the most dangerous man on earth, the next minute he's about to get finished. So you never really know what you're going to get. So it's not one I like to call at least this early on. But it's a fun matchup either way. We take biases aside, predictions aside. As a fight, it's fun as hell.
I don't know with that light heavyweight division. It's in a little bit of turmoil at the moment, isn't it?
You think so? I disagree.
Well, they've just had such a weird
It has
couple of
been.
years. You can't disagree
Yeah,
with that. I
agreed.
mean,
But
John
I don't think
Jones
now.
left. They had the title fight, obviously an injury. Then they had the draw. Jamal Hill got injured. I think I'm very confident in saying this. I believe Jamal Hill beats all of them.
Yeah. I said Jamal
Didn't
Hill
expect you
just
to
because of his...
agree with me, to be honest. I teed that
No,
up
no, I
waiting
had to
for you
think
to
for a
just
minute.
sort of
I
shut
had
it
to think for a
down.
minute because I've always said that Jamal Hill beats Alex Pereira. So I had to think for a minute because you say everybody. That's quite a big claim. I'm inclined to say yes, but yeah, I mean, I think that weirdly he's so just fundamentally basic that I think he just beats everybody. As you say, like he's about as fundamental as like basic as a fighter as you're going to get. You know, with his striking.
How
Like, he does
so?
everything to such a high level. Just he's a lot of his foundation of his work just revolves around the 1-2. And like that works for him.
And he's kicking game.
Yeah, his kick's very good as well. And you could say the Glover Teixeira performance was good, but I will have to again. We have to know and say that Glover was over the hill. No, it was very good. It was excellent. But again, my point is that Glover is old. Over the hill a little bit.
Who else done that?
A little bit is putting it lightly. Yeah, it's a good point. Jiri Pashka was taken to deep waters. Yeah, and he beat Blachowicz. Yeah, but again, MMA math. I don't like to.
No, it doesn't math.
Too much.
It doesn't math. But you can say this person's never been beaten in that fashion. And I know it was his retirement fight and whatnot, but he's still very capable even at that age. And he just got absolutely whitewashed. And I do believe that Jamal Hill very much has the skill and the style to beat almost anyone, because I think he's grappling. We've not seen
his reach is unbelievable.
I think it's just the subtleties. I think it's the subtleties for Jamal Hill. He just does a lot of the smaller things quite well. His distance management, his ability to sort of be in range but slide out of it, and then just sort of pull counter on guys at sizes that you sort of don't see that too often, right? He's got a lot of tricks and a few sly little skills that just go a little bit under the radar. And I think if people try and grapple with him, I think then they'll find out pretty quickly as well that that's not very easy to do. Unless you're Paul Craig. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's going to, unless you're Paul Craig, I don't think he's necessarily going to rule the roost for 10 years, but I definitely feel like he has all the skills to beat anyone competing at the moment, whether that's Khalil Roundtree, whether that's Rakic, whether that's Yuri. I think Yuri's a fantastic matchup for him. But talking about fantastic matchups, we finally got an Aljamain Sterling 145-pound debut. It isn't Brian Ortega, unfortunately. It is Calvin Kattar.
I'm not mad about it. I mean, as you say it's not Brian Ortega. Well, we've got Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez. Sadly, not on UFC Noche, which is crazy. I'm sorry, but that's a fun one. That's a rematch, which I'm glad we're getting, but we'll get into that. But Calvin Kattar, Sterling, I think is a really fun one. When's the last time Kattar's been in the cage? I feel like it's been a while for him. Maybe I'm wrong. You feel free to fact check me there. But I feel like it's been a while. Who did he...
Giga Chikadze?
That was a long time ago, if it was.
He's been in some wars.
I'm just checking now.
He has to take a good year off every time he fights.
Oh, no, that's right. He got injured against... he lost to Josh Emmett in a fight, which arguably
Arnold Allen.
And then Arnold Allen, he got injured. Yeah, that's right. And that's a while ago. That's an interest... That raises a lot of questions, actually, on where Kate is going to be sort of post-injury, because a lot of times people talk and they say, guys, when they have these quote-unquote fight-ending injuries, they ain't going to be the same coming back. But on the other end of the spectrum, guys like Tom Aspinall, just completely disprove that theory and go on and win a belt, a year later or so. Realistically, it's just one of those cases where we have to wait and see. It's a wait and see. But a matchup with Sterling, you're going to have your work cut out for you, because in terms of high-level grappling, Sterling is probably the first guy you're going to look to with some of the best back control probably in the whole sport. I think stylistically it's a tough one for Calvin, but give me the name. What's the name of the gym he trains at with Rob Font? Do you know the name?
Yeah, in
Mike Owens. He does stuff with them.
Yeah, Mike Owens is always with them. Mike.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called. But point is, forgive me for getting the name wrong or misplacing.
Cartel.
Something like that. I know.
No,
I know
it's
what it
something
is.
cartel. The New York cartel?
Point is, I think it might be
The
that. I can check.
something like
We're gonna fact check.
Boston
New England
cartel?
cartel.
New
That's it.
England
New England. Yeah, of
cartel.
course it's New England. Yeah. My point is, striking wise, though, they're sort of the home of sort of not
Boxing.
conventional boxers, but yeah, they're the guys you look to. So again, striker versus grappler matchup. What's not to love? It's a clash of styles. It's why MMA and the UFC was really founded. It's the clash of styles. It's the intrigue. It's what makes us watch, and we still see that even in 2023 going into 2024. So it's a fun one. It's on 300, right? Is it added to 300?
Yeah, it's on
Or was
300.
it onto something else?
I
Yeah,
think
I'm looking forward to it.
Calvin Kattar is actually a black belt, right? And he does have good ground game. Obviously, there's a difference between having good ground game, even having a black belt, and then being Aljamain Sterling, of course.
Very true.
Obviously, the natural narrative coming into it is how does he look at 145 and all the typical types of questions. I'm just excited to hopefully see Aljo maybe sit down on his shots a little bit more. Because with his style, it's always very light. And he always sets his hands up with his kicks, looking for entries for the takedown. So he's never really necessarily sitting there to cause damage. He's usually sitting there to distract you, to then hopefully get to his wheelhouse. And there's no shame in admitting that. That's just where his strengths are. It's just going to be... Because he is big. He is big. And I just wonder if he's going to still...
He is shredded at bantamweight.
I just feel like if he goes and puts on a nice little bit of size, not nothing crazy, but just actually can eat properly throughout camp, train properly throughout camp, because he's been... It's so crazy, right? It's a bit of a side tangent, but it's so crazy seeing these guys at the top, the pinnacle of the sport. So you look at Aljamain Sterling. He was a pound-for-pound fighter. One of the guys to retain the belt more times than anyone else. So a literal GOAT of their division. Now, if you take that into football terms, right, and you have a look at the type of athlete that you're dealing with in football terms and how that everything is scrutinized down to the finest detail, where their nutrition, their recovery, everything is just completely dialed down. Then you have the stark contrast of when Aljamain Sterling's making championship camps. He's doing things so suboptimally. And this isn't a slant on him. It's just almost to speak to how crazy the achievements are that he's managed to accomplish in his career whilst doing it compromised. His fat-free body mass, so that means if you take all the fat away from your body, his fat-free body mass is 147 pounds. 147. So every fight to make bantamweight, not only is he just cutting into essentially operating at better part of no fat, which is very dangerous for vital organs, for recovery, for performance, for a lot of different things, for general health in totality. But then not only that, cutting into his muscle. So, like I said, it's a little bit of a side tangent, but I just wonder, what happens if he can go into training sessions and actually be present in learning and developing his skills? What happens if he's actually happy to sit down on his shots a little bit more? What happens if he actually can eat carbs and go into his training sessions with energy and a bit more sauce? I'm quite interested to see how that turns out, because skill-wise, he doesn't do it like a lot of people out there. He doesn't, and this can very much be a banana skill for Calvin. And the truth of it is, the UFC are doing anything to stifle Aljamain Sterling's name. They really are. They go out their way.
Do you think so?
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's
I don't know.
Do you want me to sit here and list them off? Because I will do it if necessary.
I mean, I will say, if you're gonna reference the Sean O'Malley YouTube thing, because YouTube posted Sean O'Malley's knockout of him on YouTube for free, which they never do on a pay-per-view.
That's just
that's an example.
That's a scratch.
I think
it's
my point is I wouldn't count that though. I wouldn't count that because I think that's just a case of propelling Sean rather than putting Aljo down. I don't think
Sean O'Malley's not a star. You do know that.
No, come on now. I disagree with that. Sean
O'Malley's one of the biggest Sean O'Malley fans.
The biggest name in the sport,
and he's not that big of a star.
Sean O'Malley sells pay-per-views never to McGregor levels.
No, he doesn't.
He will sell up.
No, he doesn't.
I completely disagree.
Who are you disagreeing with? Me, or the person who's reading his pay-per-view points and saying, I would have never taken this fight if I clocked this is what they were going to be. That's not my mouth. That's from the person who getting the pay-per-view points from his pay-per-view. Not my mouth. Aljamain Sterling's.
What, Sterling said that?
Why would Sean O'Malley
Interesting.
sell pay-per-views? Tell me and I'll tell you why you're wrong. Because I love Sean O'Malley. I'm such a big fan. But I've realised this recently. I'm saying this. I posted him yesterday. I went crazy. But my point is, right? No, but my point
I think now
is,
he will sell more.
I don't think he does. I just don't think he does.
He's the champ now. No, he definitely does. He's so much easier to market when he's the best.
To who?
Like on paper, when you're the best.
To who?
Well, I mean, the world, the UFC. He's the champion. He will sell more as the champ simply for the fact he's the champion.
No, you're not wrong, right? But the people who his audience are, I guarantee, if you go on his demographic, in fact, I've heard him speak about. This is my point, right? This is not just a begrudged fan. I love Sean O'Malley. I just listen to his podcast. I listen to Aljo's podcast. I listen to Tim Welch's podcast. So I match up quite a lot of dots I hear in conversations, right? And his demographic is 13-year-old kids. That's his demographic,
is it?
Right? No, okay. That is his demographic.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I didn't know that.
Although Sean O'Malley isn't this just rapper, pink-haired. In essence, he's just a nice guy. He's pretty chilled. He's serious about his job, and he can be a bit silly here and there. He understands how big of a deal it is to appeal to a mass audience. And whilst he is like that to a slight degree, he doubles down on it with his Instagram content, with his cars, with his hair.
He's very good at that. And then
with all the content he does with the people like Danny Duncan, with the Nelk boys, he gets a lot of crossover fans. So you go on his Instagram, you go on his YouTube, he does have good metrics, he does pull good numbers. But when you dive into it a little bit more, he's not necessarily got a ridiculously big hardcore following from MMA fans, if that makes sense. He just doesn't. I'm not saying he doesn't have
I do agree with that.
It's just not as crazy as some would think. And I'm also saying that from a perspective of, I see how people interact with content that is of Sean O'Malley, right? And you just sort of see the differences. So when we're looking at pay-per-views, this is something that Jake Paul brought up the other day. And I thought this was so true. And I hadn't thought of it like that. Jake Paul basically if you actually watch the content he makes these days, he's very normal. He's very non-gimmicky, and he's actually grown up a lot. And I heard him talk about pay-per-views, right? Because he was getting into a discussion, and he was saying KSI was talking about pay-per-views that he was doing. And he said, the thing that people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I'd really thought about it, or he said it, is people like KSI and Tommy, right? Their audiences around younger audiences are the people that are very tech savvy, the people who are going to go and find streams and watch his pay-per-views, right? What Jake Paul has done very intelligently has positioned himself now into where he's a fight promoter. So he's dealing with Amanda Serrano in the biggest boxing fights in the world. He's co-promoting with Eddie Hearn. He's gone into the PFL. He's making pay-per-view deals with them. He's in the business side, the big boy side of things. I'm not saying the other guys aren't, but how they position themselves in business is he's in GQ magazine now doing interviews. He's got his own boxing promotion. So his audience of demographic has just gone zoom to 35 to 40. So the people now who come home from work think, oh, that boxing fight's on, click on the pay-per-view and just pay it without thinking. They're not the guys getting up their laptop, trying to put it on the TV and trying to find streams. They're not. There's too much friction. They're not trying to find the Russian links like Khabib. And my point is just a big tangent, but my point is Sean O'Malley has that side of fans. He just does. I'm not saying that's bad.
No, okay, I get where you're coming from.
But they come from that pay-per-view. So when Aljamain Sterling came out, and the reason he took that fight is because he was like, right, this is a big bag, and I can take this, and let's just try and get this win. I do believe I can win. He said he's got his pay-per-view points back. He said he does not sell pay-per-views. He just doesn't. And as soon as he said that, I was like...
Did we ever get the official number for that?
They don't release them. But looking at Aljamain's face while talking about that event and how pissed off he seemed for going through all of that and then getting the pay-per-view points, he said it was no different to the ones that he's got before.
But at the same time, that's not the fault of the UFC, though. In a way, because they've done everything they can to promote.
I'm not saying they haven't. But my point
in a way, it's partly Sterling's fault for taking the fight. And I love Sterling, but...
No, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. Gamble. I'm just saying he's not the pay-per-view draw that sometimes people may just sitting a little bit further away from the sport may think. Because...
I think that will change. If that's true now, I do think that will change, though.
I don't think so.
If I had to say something, I think that will shift.
I just don't think he's good enough on the mic. I don't think he's good enough on the mic to really start creating captivating moments and sort of... He has a good core following. He really does. He does. He did a great job early.
It's such a weird one, isn't it? There's not many
being on
like him.
Twitch and being on streams and cross promoting with the Nelk and people like that. So he's got a good following from that. But does he have strict MMA, hardcore, gonna sell pay-per-views and also crossover? I don't think he does both. Maybe
Would you not argue that MMA hardcore fans are gonna tune in and buy a pay-per-view anyway? Like,
no.
Especially if Sean O'Malley's on there, because at the end of the day, in the cage, he's fun to watch.
Pay-per-views are dying.
MMA hardcores are going to tune in.
People are buying less pay-per-views than ever. So I don't think his pay-per-view numbers are going to rise. Definitely not. I think they'll decrease. Not decrease, sorry, that's stupid. I'm just saying that. But I don't think they're going to rise, put it that way. I just don't think they are. So there's a whole side tangent. But Aljamain Sterling was not happy at his purse, put it that way. He thought it was going to be something crazy, and he was very disappointed. Yeah.
But where were you going with... You were saying about Sterling getting shafted by the UFC. What's that about? I was trying to pinpoint an example. Obviously, before when he was fighting Jan and after he won the belt, I agree. I don't think Dana did a good job of pushing him, but I feel like after that Jan rematch, I feel like that was the point where he maybe didn't have the respect of the fans.
He got the respect of the fans, I think. But not. No,
I disagree. I don't think the fans
Dana has
for the most part. I did, and I think some did, but.
Dana's never liked Aljo. He's never liked Aljo.
So if that's true, I don't understand it because I think Aljo's one of the most likable guys in the sport, and I know you agree with that as well. Aljo's one of the people I would most like to have on this podcast in terms of guests. To me, he is.
And to me,
he is.
To me, I go out of my way, and when he's on a podcast, I go and listen to it because in terms of transparency and people keeping it real, there's not many people who do that better than Aljo, and there's not many people who do that at the level. Tell me someone else who's fighting for a title and he's putting out videos of his vlogs and his camps every day, and he's talking about his injuries and like, oh, I haven't had a great session today, bit injured, hurt my foot, ripped my ribs. People don't do things like that, maybe to his own detriment. But my point is, people don't do things like that. And listen, I won't get into all the details of why he's been hard done by the UFC.
No, he has, of course.
But it's so many times they don't care for him. And the fact, I'm not being funny. I think they said there weren't a fight for him to make, and then they've just given him, Calvin Kattar, which is not. This is not a bad matchup. Don't get me wrong. It's just a fun one. And I don't think coming back to it all, I think if he gets a big win, I don't think it puts him in the. He's 2 wins away.
Maybe
Calvin Kattar puts himself 2 wins away from a title fight, which is why he wanted the match.
I do understand that though, because a featherweight, I feel like if you're moving up after losing a belt, I feel like you need to set your sights just a little bit lower out of respect for those sort of division mainstays. So I do kind of get that. In a way, you need an extra stepping stone to really put yourself in that title picture. So
he's the most.
I know, and he's got the most defenses of bantamweight. I know
of bantamweight,
and he deserves that.
He was asking for the title fight, and it was like upper weight class, and I'm like, maybe, kind of don't really care for that. Then when he lost
I wouldn't have given that to him. To be fair, if you're moving up a division, I don't think that's
everything for him to lose. And when he did, perfect, absolutely perfect. They put it this way.
That's true.
Who did they want to be champion? Sugar Sean O'Malley or Aljamain Sterling? It's not even close. It's not even close.
That's fair.
Because metrics-wise as well, Sean does numbers. He does. Like I know he said he's not a big star.
Got over 10 million views on YouTube, which is batshit. So there you go. It speaks for itself. But as you said, you make a good point actually about the paper not translating to pay-per-views. That's actually an interesting point you raised there. It's giving me something to think about. I mean, I like the matchup for Sterling. I think maybe he gets it done because I know you said Kate is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but as you said, it's a different level with a guy like Sterling. And I do think he'll probably find the back and probably get the submission if his ability is able to translate upper weight division, which I think it will. But I will say, just around it, as a guy, he'd probably be the one UFC fighter, not one, but like if I get to pick a UFC fighter to have a drink with, he'd probably be up there. I think he'd be a laugh. And so I do think we should get him on the podcast at some point. It will happen. Next time he's in the UK. Because I know he did some guys down with Jack Shaw and down in Cardiff when he was doing the Polaris event.
I was meant to be
and he was on stream and stuff, doing some cool shit there.
I was meant to be there, weren't I?
Maybe in another universe. Yeah.
Swapped Cardiff with the Etihad Arena. Yeah, so it wasn't that bad.
Couldn't be more contrasting location. Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair upgrade. Yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We've been just running for about an hour. So this has been the MMA Creators Podcast. We will see you. Actually, It'll be New Year's next Sunday. That'll be the 1st of January, right? Or the 31st,
No idea.
something like that. Maybe we'll be in 2024 next time we see you, but it'll be next Sunday, hopefully. MMA Creators Podcast. We'll see you next week. Cheers.